Amen. Now, Nehemiah is a story about a city. But not just any city. Nehemiah is a story about the city of Jerusalem, or Zion, about God's city, the fulcrum point for over 1,000 years of God's movement on planet Earth. Now we in Nehemiah 1 are jumping into kind of a huge, long, drawn-out meta-narrative in the scriptures about the Hebrews or the people of God. Let me give you 2,000 years of world history in 2 minutes. Are you ready? Genesis 1, creation. God creates the heavens and the earth, and everything is right, everything is in rhythm, everything is beautiful in God's eyes. Mankind is living in perfect harmony with his creator, Adam, walking and talking with God in the garden, face to face, enjoying his God. Genesis 3, something in theology called the fall. Adam and Eve make some stupid decisions. Sin enters the picture. And now because of sin, now mankind is out of rhythm, out of whack, no longer in sync with the living God. Not in sync like the terrible 90s band, but like the phrase, you know what I'm trying to communicate. Forgive my unholy language. But now mankind is back in harmony, walking. He's out of harmony, no longer walking in God's presence, no longer hearing God's audible voice. Now because of sin, you know the story, mankind is separated from the garden and from God himself, which means now God's heart is to rescue and save his creation, every man, every woman, every particle of the cosmos, and draw people back into relationship with himself. Now his plan is his Messiah or his Savior. We now know as who? Jesus. But before Jesus, God needs to prepare a people. He starts with a man named who? Father Abraham. And he had many what? Many sons. From Abraham, he makes a family. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. From a family, he makes 12 tribes. From 12 tribes, he makes an entire people, the Hebrews. And after hundreds of years in bondage in Egypt, God takes the people out of Egypt, out of slavery, and into the promised land. Now, Jerusalem, the city in our story, was the capital of the promised land, or of Israel, or of the Hebrews. But keep in mind, to the ancient Jews, Jerusalem was more than a city. More than buildings and architecture and walls, Jerusalem was symbolic. Jerusalem was God's, for lack of a better word, dwelling place among his people. Jerusalem was where the temple was, and the temple was where God was. But maybe you do, maybe you don't know the story. Israel goes upside down. God's heart with Israel, his plan with his people, was one, to prepare the way for his Messiah, but two, to show the world what he's like, non-Jewish people, the entire planet, every man, every woman, what God is like, to put on display his Torah or his way, and to reach out, because God's heart is to draw everyone back into relationship with himself. And his heart with his people was to show the world what he's like. His opening line at Sinai is, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests." A priest's job is to represent God to the people and the people to God. But Israel, her job description is priest, draw people back to God, help people reconcile with the Creator. But for the most part, she is a total, miserable, complete failure. Not on God's part. And around here we believe, in fact, God's not done with the Jewish people. But on Israel's part, she was a total failure. For hundreds of years, she plunges into sin and idolatry. Her story is kind of like our story. She plunges into idolatry and she rebels against God, and she turns to corruption and oppression and slavery and later on human sacrifice. I mean, it gets dark, it gets bad. And God, for hundreds of years, sends the prophets. Men like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Elijah. Men saying, listen, turn back to God, return to your Savior. He's in love with you. He's your Father. You are his sons and daughters. He is your lover. You are his bride. Turn back, repent of your sin. Turn away from your oppression and deceit and idolatry and turn back to the living God. And there's a revival from time to time and a movement back towards the living God once in a while, but over time, Israel plunges back into sin time and time again. And after hundreds of years of waiting and patience and reaching out his hands, God says, okay, out of love, enough is enough, your will be done. And God pours, after years of warning his people, threatening his people, God pours out his wrath, but not in the way we would think, not with fire falling from heaven, or like the guy I saw with the sandwich board sign today driving here right in front of the middle school, 12-year-olds getting out, you're going to hell. Great, thank you. Not like we think of wrath. God pours out his wrath by walking away. He takes away his protection from Israel, his safety, his prosperity. He steps back and leaves Israel by herself in the world. Within years, Assyria, the story, sweeps down from the north, destroys Israel, the 10 tribes in the north. And a few years later, King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire sweeps down from the northeast and destroys Judea, the 2 tribes in the south, and the city of Jerusalem. Not only the city, he destroys the temple. Keep in mind, the temple was where God was. He sweeps down, he destroys the city, and he takes away God's people into something in theology called exile, or the exilic period, meaning now he takes away the Jews who are left, now called the remnant, the ones who are not dead. And he takes Israel away, the people living in Jerusalem and Judea away as slaves, living in captivity in Babylon for 70 years, just like the prophet Jeremiah said years before. And after 70 years, after Jeremiah's prophecy was over and done with, the Medes and the Persians sweep down from the north into Babylon, modern-day Iraq, and take over and destroy the Babylonian Empire. Now, the Medes and the Persians are more favorable toward the Jews than the Babylonians. In fact, one of the kings, who's a man named Cyrus, says, okay, you Jewish people who are now living here for 70 years, go back home. Go back to the city of Jerusalem and rebuild your temple. Now, the book of Ezra, right before Nehemiah, is all about the Hebrews returning back to the city of Jerusalem and rebuilding the temple under the leadership of a man named Zerubbabel and later a man named Ezra. In fact, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book for hundreds of years, separated during the Middle Ages. But Nehemiah is a continuation of the same story. Nehemiah 1 takes place, we think, about 13 years after the end of the book of Ezra. Now a man named Nehemiah goes back to the city, not to rebuild the temple, but to rebuild the walls. Ezra is about rebuilding the temple. Nehemiah is about rebuilding the walls. But that said, keep in mind, we are not reading 2 books about building projects or architecture or construction or framing. Jerusalem, like I said, to the Jews was more than a city. Jerusalem was a symbol. And Ezra and Nehemiah, these men are going back not to make buildings, but to rebuild and reconstruct the people of God, and to pray and work and sweat and bleed for revival in the city of Jerusalem. Now, during our study of the book of Nehemiah, we're going to look at chapter 1 right now. I would like to ask you to think about 2 things in the back of your mind. 1, think about the city of Portland, where we live. The city we love, anybody here? And inhabit. Because our city, I would argue, like Jerusalem, is kind of in bad shape. Broken down, beautiful, yes, and cold today, praise Jesus. I'm wearing a jacket for the first day of the year. God is awesome. But back to the story. Our city is in desperate need of Jesus. And 2, I want you to think about the church. Whatever church you are a part of, Solid Rock or The Way or whatever church you are a part of, wherever you are from, you are welcome, or Athey Creek, Imago, Southwest Bible, wherever you are from, awesome. But I want you to think about your church, your community of faith as a city within a city. Because I would argue the church is kind of like a city. We are a place where we do culture and society and money and marriage and family and sexuality and gender, where we do life different than the world around us. Would you agree? But not as a subculture, but as a city within a city, as an outpost for God's kingdom here on earth, reaching out to lost people all around us, people you work with and hang out with and live with and are related to, people who don't know Jesus. We are a city within a city. And I want you to think about the city of Portland and whatever church you are a part of as we read and look at Nehemiah rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem. Now, let's jump into the story. We're picking up right in the middle of a huge story, pivotal moment in Israel's history. Nehemiah 1:1. Here we go. The words of Nehemiah, son of somebody with a difficult to pronounce first name. Nehemiah was a Jewish man living about 450 years, we think, before Jesus. He's one of the most influential leaders in Jewish history, but before we get to work, I think you should know, I think it's interesting, he's not a priest, he's not a prophet, he's not a pastor, he doesn't work my job. He's a normal dude working a normal job. We read later on, he was cupbearer to the king. I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking God uses the people up front, when in reality, God uses anybody with humility and passion for his name and his kingdom. Nehemiah, normal dude, normal job, going to turn the world upside down. Here we go. In the month of Kislev, which in the Babylonian calendar corresponds with about November, December in our kind of annual rhythm. In the 20th year, we think he means the 20th year of the king. In the ancient world, you'd measure time from the beginning of a king's rule, and which would make the year about 445 BC. While I was in the citadel of Susa. Now, Susa was not the capital of Persia. Susa was a winter palace where the Persian kings would live during the cold months of the year. Archaeologists unearthed the palace we are reading about in Nehemiah 1 years ago, and it's like 350 feet long and wide, stone columns like 80 feet high, which I know today is like no big deal, but back like a long time ago was huge, right? Think ornate, opulent, luxurious palace where the kings would live for the winter. Nehemiah is living in comfort and wealth, and more on that later. Now, 2, Hanai, which sounds like a city in Japan, but is in reality some Jewish dude in the story. Hanai, one of my brothers, we don't know if he means like biological brothers or Jewish friends, but either way, came from Judah, back in Jerusalem, God's place, with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. Okay, how are the people doing? How is Ezra doing? How is my old buddy Zerubbabel, right? He's got a lame name. How is he, right? And how is the rebuilding going? What is the city looking like? Is everything going okay? They said to me, 3, those who survived the exile, the destruction of Jerusalem, and are back in the province, Ezra and his band of, followers, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down. Its gates have been burned with fire. Okay, Nehemiah, bad news. It's like worst case scenario. I mean, the wall is gone. The wall is torn down. The gates are burned with fire. Now, keep in mind, we don't quite get why the wall is a big deal in our day and age, but in the ancient world, your wall around your city, the walls were your defense system, your protection, your safety, your security. Living in a city in the ancient world with no walls would be like living in America today with no Air Force or no army or no defense system. You would be open to attack from anybody and everybody. And he says, listen, it's worst case scenario. Our city is in ruins, shattered from years and years before with Nebuchadnezzar. The walls are torn down. We are open to attack. We are trying to rebuild the temple, but we are failing and morale is low. And our entire city, God's city, is in ruins. And he uses interesting language. He says, and we are a disgrace. The word disgrace in the original language can be translated embarrassment. We are an embarrassment because he's intelligent. He realizes, listen, we are the people of God. We are God's people. Our job is to show the world what God is like, and we live in a dump. The walls are torn down, and our temple, which is God's presence among us, is in bad shape. Our city is a wreck. Now look at 4. When I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. I mean, Nehemiah is wrecked to the core. I mean, he's a dude, and we read later on, he's like super like manly kind of dude, and he's crying like a girl. No offense, you girls, you are awesome, but you cry all the time. And some of you, more than others, but we love you anyway. Back to the story, shut up, But Nehemiah in the story he breaks down in tears. He's weeping, he's mourning. The text says for some days, we discover later on in chapter 2, For 4 months. Not like, oh, kind of bad day, bad news. For 4 months. He's mourning and fasting and weeping and crying, God, why? He is wrecked. He is moved to the core. Now, here's what I think is fascinating. Did you know Jerusalem was destroyed 140 years before Nehemiah 1? Meaning what? Meaning Nehemiah already knows this. He already knows about the city being in bad shape. He already knows about the walls being torn down and the city being in. This is not new information. This is 140 years old. It would be like me asking, how's Washington, D.C. after your trip back east or whatever? Bad news, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Which is horrible, don't get me wrong. And for 4 months, I'm in sackcloth and ashes and wearing black and fasting, God, why? And mourning. You would be thinking dude, do you go to public school or something? What's the big deal? You didn't know? Where are you, right? And this is not new information. And people speculate, what's going on here? Why is he breaking down now? Here, 140 years later. Now, the leading theory, in fact, the only possible explanation is something happens in Nehemiah's heart in chapter 1. He is, in some supernatural and mystic way, he is moved by God's Spirit with God's heart for the city of Jerusalem. He feels now what God feels. He sees now what God sees. He hears now what before he was deaf to and oblivious to and ignorant of. Now he sees what God sees, and his heart is breaking. Because remember the story about Jesus in the city of Jerusalem. Fast forward to Luke chapter 19 later on in the scriptures, and we read Jesus 1 week before his death, burial, and what? Resurrection, because he's alive. 1 week before the cross, he walks into the city of Jerusalem as a king riding a donkey, which is a symbol of peace, and the entire city is out front throwing a party for Jesus, waving palm branches, paving the ground, the road with clothing, and singing, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And instead of Jesus rejoicing, we read he breaks down in tears. Jesus. It is written, when he saw the city, he wept over it. Because he sees the pain and the idolatry and the sin and the depravity and the lostness of the city God loves. And the leading theory is what happens here is Nehemiah is moved, like Jesus was, by God's Spirit and God's heart for the city. You should know, before we go on, God is passionate about cities. Not just cities like Jerusalem back in the day, but cities like us, like Portland, Gresham. Anybody? Yeah, right? You are from Gresham. Awesome. Whoever you are, God bless you. Wherever you are from, Vancouver, Newburgh, Tigard, Beaverton, the far reaches of human existence, Forest Grove. I don't know about Hillsborough, maybe not, but maybe, I don't know. No, you guys. God is passionate about city. Why? Because God is passionate about people. And because most people live where? In the city, not Forest Grove, though we love you guys over here. God is passionate about cities because God is passionate about people. And about people who don't know him and who are far from him. Not only that, but the city is where culture is made. The city, for the most part, is where art, music, and film, and theater is made, where business and commerce take place, import and export, and shipping, and law and government, and law enforcement, and immigration. Culture, for the most part, is made in the city. Which is why when you read the scriptures, you discover Paul and the early apostles would move from city to city, preaching the gospel and planting churches everywhere. In fact, most of the New Testament was written not to people as much as to cities. Cities like Rome and Corinth and Philippi and Colossae and Ephesus and Thessalonica. Huge chunks of the scriptures were written to cities. Dear Portland, wow. In fact, If you study history, you discover Christianity for hundreds of years was an urban movement. Historians guesstimate by the year 300, about 250 years after Jesus, in the Roman Empire, 90% of the people living in cities were Christians. 90%. And only about 10%, people guesstimate, of people in the empire living in the rural areas were Christians, which I think is interesting because today we think of the opposite. We think of Christianity as thriving out in the suburbs or out in the rural areas where it's safe and you can kind of churn your own butter and milk your own cows and make your own clothes, and it's awesome. I'm not judging you. You are amazing. And we think of Christianity as something safer away from, culture, because we think of the city as an epicenter for paganism and crime and violence and debauchery and immorality and liberalism and atheism and secularism. But in the early church, the opposite was true. The city was where Christians are. The city was where God was moving. The city was where God was chasing down people and planting churches and breathing revival, new life into the people of God. In fact, I would argue the story of the scriptures from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation, is the story of the movement of humans from a garden to what? A city. In fact, Jesus right now, if you study the scriptures, is living in a city called the New Jerusalem in heaven. And at the end of the story, Revelation 21 and 22, we read about his city, his hometown, coming down from heaven and crashing into earth, where we live with him forever in a city. What a story. Which means what? Which means God's heart breaks for the city. And by city, I don't mean the architecture or the buildings or the streets. I mean the people. The people making culture, doing life, who are far from him. His heart breaks for Jerusalem, for Portland, for people who don't know the living God. And Nehemiah here, he's broken, he's wrecked. Now, I don't know about you, but reading his story the last few days, I was struck by how unlike Nehemiah I am most of the time. By that I mean when I think about my city, and I love my city. I'm like Portland through and through. I love the rain, I love the cold, I love weird people. Okay, true story. I go to a Mexican food cart out in Southeast Portland on a date with my wife. Yeah, I'm a big spender, right? Not like a restaurant, like a cart out in the rain. It was awesome. My wife's amazing. She's Hispanic. I love Mexican food so much. I married an Hispanic woman, and she's awesome. And we go out, not a high-class date, we go to this Mexican cart. There's a vegan menu. Where else in the world is there a Mexican cart with a vegan menu but Portland, Oregon? I was like praising Jesus as I ate my soy riso taco. It was awesome. It was actually quite tasty. But back to the story. I love my city, but when I think about my city, when I think about how messed up my city is, how lost my city is, how dark, how demonic, how Satan's fingers and nails are all over my city. I mean, the lostness, on one hand, the pluralism and the bizarre spirituality and the syncretism, and on the other hand, the open antagonism against God and the scriptures and truth and the church and the lies and the deception and the hatred of what we know is true and what we know is right. When I think of the liberalism and the hatred of authority and the hatred of reality and eternity and when I think of how upside down our city is, most of the time, to be honest, I'm not like Nehemiah. I don't break down in tears. Sometimes I laugh. Sometimes, being honest with you guys, sometimes I mock, most of the time, I ignore. Most of the time, my heart is numb and indifferent because in my mind, this is Portland. This is what I remember the city was like when I was growing up, and this is how I imagine the city will always be. But what if I'm wrong? What if God's heart breaks for the city? What if I'm wrong? But back to Nehemiah. His heart is breaking for the city. He's wrecked. Now, he prays. Look at 5. Then I said, he's about to pour out his heart in front of Jesus. O Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands, let your ear be attentive and let your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. Now he opens his prayer with praise and worship and adoration for two things, for God's power and God's love, which I think is awesome. Because God is power and he is love. Most people who are powerful are not loving. Would you agree? And most people who are loving, to be honest, are not powerful. But God is power and love, which means what? Which means he is love. His heart breaks for the city, for lost people who don't know him, for broken people like us who say stupid things on microphones. His heart breaks for us. But at the same time, he is power. He has the power, the ability, the capability, the resources, the intelligence to reach down from heaven and move on planet Earth, move in human history, to change, I repeat, to change the city, the culture, the world, the day and age in which we live. He has love and he has power. And Nehemiah opens with praise, and next he moves to interesting confession. Let's keep reading. He says, I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses, or the Torah, God's word, the Jewish scriptures. Interesting. Notice what happens here. Don't tune me out. Don't play on your iPhone or text whoever. Listen to me, at least for the next 3 hours, okay? I promise I'm going to be short tonight. Listen. Pay attention. Notice what is happening right here in the story. Nehemiah is confessing the sins of Jerusalem and Israel, and he, I repeat, he is taking responsibility on his own shoulders and those of his family and his friends and his people for the dark, spiritual, political, and socioeconomic state of his city, Jerusalem. Interesting. He is not blaming Assyria for destroying Jerusalem. He is not blaming Babylon, not blaming Persia, not blaming, the Hebrews, those people out there. He is taking complete and total responsibility on his own shoulders for the state, for the dark, messed up state of his city. And I think interesting because we today in America, we live in, I would argue, a blame-happy culture. We love blame shifting. We hate taking responsibility for any problems. I detest talk radio. And by detest, I mean my stomach turns. Not because I don't think politics is interesting. To be honest, I think it's fascinating. But because you turn on your radio any time between noon and 6 p.m., and it's blame shifting. It's talking about the problems in our nation or the problems in our city or the problems in the world and finding some scapegoat, some propitiation, somebody to accuse. Everything is accusatory. It's the right's fault, or it's the left's fault, or it's the current president's fault, or the past president's fault, or it's socialist's fault, or capitalist's fault, or it's somebody's fault, and it's not ours, but it's somebody's. And to be honest, I think it's pathetic. And I think, to be honest, our culture, our blame-happy culture, bleeds over into the church. No offense. And how we, as believers in Jesus, how we view sin, how we view the church as a whole. I mean, classic example, when people bash the American church. Okay, you are the American church. It's you. You're bashing yourself, me, us. We are the people we're out bashing and criticizing. It's arrogance and it's pride and it's blame shifting. Or when people don't take responsibility for their own sin, when people make excuses and pass off sin and pass off responsibility and make excuses, it's immature. We live in a culture where we hate to take responsibility for anything, not even our own sin, much less the state of our city. But Nehemiah here is taking responsibility on his own shoulders, and he's asking God's forgiveness and for God's mercy, which is replete and there, for the darkness of his city. I mean, what if we had the guts to pray like Nehemiah? What if we had the guts to stop blaming the world? What? Blaming, and take responsibility. God, we ask your forgiveness for not shining in our dark city. It's like the light blaming the dark for being dark. When it's dark outside, you don't get mad at the darkness. Darkness is dark. You question, where's the light? When the city is dark and depraved and liberal and far from Jesus and deception is everywhere, and you don't blame the dark. You ask the question, where are God's people? Where is the church? Where is the light? I mean, remember when Jesus said, you are the what? Light of the world. He goes on to say, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. You don't light a light and put it under a bowl, which I think is weird. Maybe there's some first century thing I don't know about yet, but bowl, you're right, I don't. But you don't light a light, put it under a bowl. You let your light shine, he says. Did you know in context, he's not giving Israel a pep talk. He's rebuking Israel. When you read the text in context, he's rebuking Israel, the Hebrews, for not being the light of the world, for not shining. Remember, her job description was reach out to people who don't know God and draw people back into relationship with the Creator. She wasn't. She was exclusive and arrogant and judgmental and hateful and critical and proud. He's rebuking his people for not shining. Now, I'm not rebuking you guys. You guys are amazing and awesome, but I am saying, what if we had the guts to, like Nehemiah, take responsibility when we think about how upside down our city is, how desperate our city is for Jesus and the gospel and the truth of the scriptures? What if we had the guts to pray like Nehemiah, ask God's forgiveness, ask for God's mercy, and take responsibility on our own shoulders for how Portland is and what Portland is like, rather than blame others? Interesting. He opens with confession. Now he makes two requests of God. Look at 8. Remember, he says, the instruction you gave your servant Moses, and he's about to quote the Torah in the book of Deuteronomy. If you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people whom you redeem by your great strength and your mighty hand. His first request is, listen, God, keep your promises. Because God back in the Torah said, listen, if I ever punish you, if I ever exile you into captivity and you repent and you turn away from your sin, I promise to take you back to Jerusalem and rebuild you as a people. And Nehemiah is saying, listen, you are powerful, but you are also love. And you promise you love, you promise your mercy, you promise your faithfulness. Jesus, keep your promises. Don't turn your back on us now. We ask your forgiveness. We take responsibility for our city being destroyed by sin and evil and violence. And don't turn your back on us now. Keep your promises. Now he goes on to say in 11, O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight and revere in your name, the Jews. Give your servant Nehemiah success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man, for I was cupbearer to the king. Now his second request, he's asking for favor in the eyes of the king of the Persian Empire, for God to move in the king's heart, favor to overturn some political legislation and let Nehemiah go and let some Jews go back to the city and rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. Now we're going to look at chapter 2 and the story of Nehemiah and the king next week, but here's what you should know. Nehemiah is the cupbearer. Now don't think like lowly servant, okay, like most people think. The cupbearer in reality was a position of honor and high respect in the Persian government. He was one of the few men with daily and direct access to the king, which back in the day was kind of rare. He was not only responsible to drink the king's wine before him and make sure there was no poison in the cup, which was a great job, by the way. Lousy health benefits, but great pay. But also he's responsible for the king's royal seal, meaning some lawyer-like responsibilities. And he was the king's CFO. He was responsible for the king's money and the national budget. We are talking about somebody high-ranking in the Persian Empire with a lucrative, we think high-paying, successful job in politics. Yes, he's a normal dude working a normal job. Maybe not normal job. He's normal dude working an important and influential job in the Persian government. And he's about to, we're going to read next week, stick his neck out on the line and, to be honest, risk his life by asking the king, would you let me, would you let my brothers and my sisters go back to the city, return to the city, and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He's about to put his neck on the line, step out in faith, and jump out into the unknown. And we're going to talk about him next week. Now, I know what you were all thinking. What in the world are we going to talk about tonight? Speaking of Nehemiah, speaking of the city, upside down, Jerusalem, and I would argue ours. Speaking of God's heart for the city and lost people and culture. Speaking of Christians going, not running away from, but going to the city and loving the city and preaching the gospel right in the heart, surrounded by people who don't know God. We are going to put before you tonight, right now, some new vision, some huge exciting changes for what's coming down the road and what we believe God is leading us towards. We're going to put in front of you right now 3 new things, 3 changes we are going to make to the ministry here and what we believe God is leading us to. Now, changes always mean new vision. And new vision most of the time starts with problems. Yes, you heard me right. Most of the time when you hear about new vision or changes, most of the time changes, new vision starts with problems. For the last, I was trying to figure out today, I think about 2 years, but maybe more like 2.5 years, we being myself and the leadership at Solid Rock, the pastors and the elders and some of our kind of core leadership team, those of us responsible to love you guys and serve you guys, take the posture of servants and of leaders. We have been wrestling with 2 problems for years now. If you could climb into the back of our elders' meetings and pastors' meetings, and if you could listen to conversations we make with people outside of here we love and respect and look up to, we have been wrestling and seeking God and praying and fasting and questioning and talking and conversating for, I think, over 2 years now about 2 separate problems. Let me walk you through what the 2 problems we think are, and then with what we believe is the solution by God's Spirit. The first problem is the city of Portland. Would you agree? Like I said, I love our city to the core. I'm here for life, God willing, but my city is jacked up, to quote from Jose, who's right here in the front row. My city is in desperate need of Jesus. All the things we are talking about tonight. There is a massive gaping hole waiting for the church to rise up, for disciples of Jesus to rise up, and for the light of the world to start shining and stop hiding in our dark city. About 2.5 years ago, I gave a teaching called Born After Midnight, which was kind of a question. What if I'm wrong? What if Portland changed? In our lifetime, what if our city, which is known all around the world as an epicenter for paganism and liberalism, what if our city was rocked to the core, transformed, for lack of a better word, by the gospel of Jesus and the Spirit of God? What if God did something here, now, in our lifetime, not like in a book somewhere or in a biography somewhere or some place, far away on the other side of the ocean, but what if God did something here and now? And not with like great, amazing celebrity, but with people like us, with normal, average, bent out of shape, people like us. What if God did something here? And what if in our lifetime, because of our work and effort and prayer and fasting and faith, and because more than anything of God's Spirit moving in huge ways, what if our city was changed? What if God did something huge? And after the teaching, I invited anybody who wanted to show up back here at 12:01 in the morning, right after midnight, and pray all night long. If you want, hey, no warning, no flyer, no PR, but if you want to join us, we invite you back. And hundreds of you showed up. Anybody remember? Anybody here? You guys remember? We showed up and we prayed for hours and hours. It was I will never forget the night We prayed for hours. I mean, some of you guys are insane, which is why we love you. Some people showed up at 7 for the way, stayed through church, stayed through the prayer meeting, and left from here at like 4:30 in the morning to go open at Starbucks. You people are bizarre. And I think God did something, in my mind, God did something in us as a community. Yes, in me, but in us as a community that night, that moment, that prayer meeting. I think God sparked something in us. I think he gave us some hope that maybe it's more than idealism, maybe revival, a move of God, whatever language you employ, maybe it's not impossible. And that night led to something called 7, which we've done now for 2 summers, 3 times for the last 2 years. 7, if you are new around here, is 7 days of prayer and fasting for revival in Portland, Oregon. Every June, we take 7 days of our lives and we give up food and we give up some sleep and we give up a lot of comfort and we seek God. Not for ourselves, not for Solid Rock even, but for our city. And we ask God with prayer and with fasting and with some desperation, Jesus, would you please move in a huge, massive way in our city, our lifetime. We won't give up, we won't quit, we don't cave. God, would you move? In the last 2 years, now 21 days now total of prayer and fasting have been amazing and life-changing for me because, and I think I'm not alone, in my heart and in the heart of our community, I think what God's birthed in us, it is a greater vision and a greater desire to look at our city, which right now is a wreck, and to seek the transformation of our city. And it's made, I can speak on behalf of the leadership at Solid Rock and in particular myself, it's made our goal no longer a big mega church in the suburbs, which nothing wrong with a big church in the suburbs, but it's made our goal a move of God in our city, which is way bigger than Solid Rock and the Way and whatever church you are a part of, way bigger than Building T and Friday nights and Sundays, which is huge and citywide and church-wide. Is going to take thousands of people and churches and leaders and prayer and movement and faith and courage and risk-taking. But for us now, we feel like the measure of success is no longer like how many people can we get in here. The measure now of success is outside these walls. Can we change our city? Or can we be a part of God changing our city? But the problem we have been wrestling with the last 2 years is, okay, we love prayer and we don't love fasting, but it's awesome and it's good and it's important. And we love seeking God and praying for a move of God. But do you ever feel like at some point we should do something? I mean, you ever feel like, to be honest, between me and you, like prayer is amazing, fasting is great, but should we do something? I mean, at some point, teachings from Nehemiah 1 on the city and God's heart become, I think, empty rhetoric and shallow hype if we don't do something. And for years now, we have been wrestling with, should we do something? Should we step out in faith? Should we take some kind of risk? Should we do something in order to reach our city with the gospel? Now, that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is the way. You guys, me, us. Yes, you heard me right. The way, don't misunderstand me, is, I think, amazing. What God is doing here among us on Friday nights as a community of friends and brothers and sisters from all over the city, to me, is mind-blowing. In the city of Portland, Oregon, where there are more dogs than Christians, true story, on Friday nights, with people with us, God is moving and he is transforming our lives and he's drawing people here, and I'm blown away. But that said, what you are looking, if you are new around here, what you are looking at all around you right now, what is taking place right now, is not, to be honest, what we intended the way to be in the beginning. About 6 years ago, there was a group of people, myself included, and the now elders at Solid Rock, and my dad and the pastors, and we started dreaming about what a new church on the west side of Portland could look like and feel like and do in God's kingdom. And when you plant a church, you start with like some core things that everybody does, like Acts chapter 2, the teaching of the scriptures, the Lord's Supper, baptism, gospel, okay, Jesus, right? He's like the center of everything. But then when you plant a church, it's like you have a blank canvas almost. And you open up your eyes and you ask God's Spirit, all right, what's your heart? What's our role? There are other churches here. What's our role? What makes us unique by your Spirit? What are you calling us, Jesus, to do in the kingdom in our city? And one of the things God spoke to our hearts before the church was planted, like 6 years ago, the church is about 5.5 years old now, was to pour into you guys, to college students and 20-somethings and young people, the emerging generation. When you step back and look at the church as a whole in America, the church is hemorrhaging young people. Every year, 3,000 churches close their doors. I read the other day, 80% of churches in America are plateauing numerically and starting to decline. And most of the loss in the church is people our age. Young people, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, the least church demographic, I hate that word, but the least church demographic in America is 18 to 25-year-olds. Now, in case you are new around here, there are quite a few 18 to 25-year-olds all around you, which I think is amazing. And when God spoke to our hearts years ago, we believe God called us to be a church that outside of the nucleus of what we are, Jesus, Lord's Supper, baptism, a church that is passionate about pouring into a generation and some people who maybe are undervalued in other places or maybe even ignored. And we said, let's reach out to those people. Let's be intentional about loving those people and helping those people grow in Jesus. Not because we're like, hey, what demographic should we market? We are way not that smart. If we could, we probably would, but we're kind of thick-headed. But because we believe Jesus' Spirit was leading us to what you are looking at now. So I started a Bible study with 6 guys. Myself, Brooke, who's playing the drums tonight, making announcements, Michael Watson, who's leading worship, Brandon Moser, who's right there in the back, and 1 or 2 others. We started a Bible study, and then later on, we opened up the Bible study to girls, and the whole deal exploded. Like overnight, people started showing up in droves. Amazing church growth formula, godly women. It's incredible. But, no, I'm joking. Kind of. Back to the story. But our point with the way, and here's what you need to understand and track with me for about 30 seconds. Our point with the way was not an alternative college people, 18 to 28-year-old church service because our church is kind of old and outdated and we don't like young people. Our point was, listen, our entire church is passionate about raising up emerging leaders and releasing you guys into God's kingdom in ministry. And outside of Sundays and house churches and the regular rhythm of the church, let's pour into our college students and young people in a more intentional, more deliberate way. And our goal was not a church service for college students. Our goal was to help you grow in Jesus in greater ways and help you build community. Now, fast forward a few years. In about 3 years, the way grew from 6 dudes in Michael Watson's apartment down by PSU, downtown. We moved to my parents' living room when the girls showed up. We moved to this place called G1 down the road. Anybody remember? The garage, which we called the garage because it was a garage. Because there was like a garage door and concrete and a trailer parked there, and we would move the trailer out and walk in and do church. And from there to G2, and in about 3 years, we grew from about 6 dudes in Michael's apartment to about 300 of you guys, and it was awesome. We were having a blast, seeking Jesus together. God was changing lives and reviving people's hearts, and then we opened up Building T right here, which is awesome. And we moved here about 2.5 years ago, and opening night, we jumped from like 300 to like 500 people. And I hate to use numbers, so forgive me, don't judge me. But we grew, like almost doubled in size in one night. And in 6 months, we like doubled in size and grew to like almost 1,200 people in like 6 months. And we packed the place out, and here we are about 2 years later, no room for anybody. And ever since we got here, and you guys all showed up, and we love you all to pieces. You were like the most beautiful, amazing people I know. But we have been asking the question, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? Because now what the way looks like is a giant church service with nobody who's young and nobody who's old. Except the one difference is at our normal church, we would ask you to give money and participate and volunteer and work with kids and work under the authority of the leadership and go to house churches and get on mission and go to Africa. Here we're like, dude, show up, drink our coffee, eat our food. We love you. You're awesome. And we do love you, don't get me wrong. And you are awesome. But for the last 2 years, we've been wondering, okay, are we doing the right deal? Is this it? Does God want us to just show up and watch and worship Jesus and sing and hear some teaching from myself or one of the guys and hang out with people and eat a free meal and go back to our lives like I hate to use the word, but more like consumers? And I'm not in any way, shape, or form blaming you guys. I love you guys to pieces. You are the most passionate, Jesus-loving group of people I've ever known in my entire journey on planet Earth. But we have been questioning, all right, what are we trying to accomplish? If our goal is a whole bunch of college students and 20-somethings in a garage for a worship teaching event, awesome, we're done. Let's enjoy life. But if our goal is different, if our goal is, listen, we are passionate about young people and we want to help young people grow as disciples of Jesus, we have been questioning, I wonder if there are better ways to do college ministry. We've been listening to you guys, getting together with groups of 2 people, 20 people, 10 people, and asking you guys questions and asking you guys about your lives. And what is emerging from our conversations with you is the crying need in your lives is community and some kind of mentoring. You are dying for some older people or older in faith who know Jesus, love Jesus, and have some maturity to walk with you for 6 months or 6 years or whatever, and to help you live your life for Jesus. And we are more and more wondering okay, are there better ways to do college ministry? Are there better ways to value you guys, pour into you guys, teach you guys, grow you guys, and release you into the kingdom of Jesus? And we have been wrestling with this, to be honest, for years now. I've been traveling and talking with authors and people who study college ministry and think about these things and pummeling people with questions and fasting and praying and seeking God, because on one hand, what I'm looking at right now is the best thing I've ever seen in ministry. On the other hand, we are wondering, could we do what we are doing better? Now, which leads me, 2 problems. Our city, desperate need of Jesus, lost, far from God. You and me, here we are. What are we trying to accomplish? It's awesome. It's fun. It's a blast. We love you guys, but we've just become a church without all of the healthy pieces of what a real healthy church looks like. And now here we are. We believe God is taking these 2 problems and leading us to some solution, and we are going to ask you guys to step out with us into some new things. Here's the deal. We are going to take the way, what we are a part of right now, and we are going to break the ministry into 3 separate but linked new things. We are not ending what's going on right here, but we are going to break what you are looking at, what we are a part of, because a ministry is not a time slot or a night of the week or a formula. Song, reading, song, announcements, teaching, song, doxology, bye-bye. It's not, okay? We are the way, God's people whom God's Spirit is moving in. We are the way we are God's people, God's sons and God's daughters. We're going to take us and break us and what you're looking at now into 3 separate but linked ministries. Number 1, we are, God willing, everything starts with God willing because nothing is concrete yet, but God willing, we are going to take what you are looking at now and we are going to expand the way into like a full kind of orbed conference. Either once a year or once a quarter, we don't know, somewhere between once and 4 times a year. We're going to do what we're doing now for like an entire weekend. We show up on Friday nights at like 7 and we don't go home until like Saturday nights at midnight or Sunday afternoons or something like that. Maybe we do it here. Maybe we do it like out in the country and we go camping. I have no idea. But we're going to go seek Jesus together. We're going to do it in partnership with Rock Harbor Church. Those of you know Mike Erie, our friends Mike and Todd Proctor. We're great friends with these guys because this is a church way down in Orange County, California, who's super like-minded with us and also is passionate about pouring into young people. And Mike and I are good friends, and we're going to do this kind of in collusion with those guys. The plan is, we'll see what happens, but the plan is to do like the way south and the way north. And Mike and I and some different teachers and worship bands from here and down there get together and do the conference down south one weekend and maybe rock back up here and hang out with us for the weekend up here and take an entire weekend, maybe once a year, maybe once a quarter, we don't know quite yet, and pour into you guys in a very intentional, very deliberate way for an entire weekend of teaching and worship and prayer and seeking Jesus together. Sound good? Now, the second new thing we are hoping to step out into is, God willing, we are going to start a new college ministry for those of you who are a part of Solid Rock. We recognize tons of you are from all different churches, which is great. You're welcome here. We love you. Don't go away. But for those of you who are a part of Solid Rock, we're going to start a new college ministry, which is different than what you are looking at right now. It's not going to be event-based like The Way, where the goal is some huge teaching, worship event on Friday nights. There is going to be a weekly gathering where we get together and do life together and walk with one another. But the main thrust is going to be community and mentoring. Community, we're going to open up venues for you to build relationships with people and do life and create new friendships with people that right now you don't know, and do life together, pushing one another to love Jesus with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and walk with him forever, which means we're going to do things like retreats, maybe once a month, where we take like 40 or 50 of you away to some house over the beach or up in Mount Hood or at Sun River, wherever, and we study the scriptures maybe in the morning and in the evening, but during the day we hang out, we build life together, we bear one another's burdens, we hang out, we build relationships because we value community. And I'm not just talking about, being friends with people and hanging out, but I'm talking about living together and loving one another and helping one another and bearing one another's burdens. We're also hoping to do things like smaller venues, not like giant here where you walk in and you're like, holy smokes, I'm shy, but smaller venues like Bible studies and early morning studies and small groups and house churches led by young people right here in the garage right now, where we open up doors for you to build relationships with people your own age and walk through life together. There is going to be a weekly gathering. We are hoping to hire a college pastor, somebody who's going to pour into you guys full-time, 6 days a week, loving on you guys and helping you grow in Christ. But the next thrust and focus of the ministry is going to be, I'm not sure what we're going to call it right now. We are thinking about calling it spiritual parenting, which is in essence taking people who are older in the church. We have hundreds of people who are older and care about you guys and love you guys and are passionate about you guys, and helping them, teaching them, training them, equipping them how to mentor and disciple and love on you guys, and then taking those of you who desire mentorship, who desire somebody to walk with you for a year or 2 years and help you live life and become disciples of Jesus, and putting the two of you together to do life on life in very practical, very tangible, very incarnational ways. So community and mentorship and spiritual parenting in some kind of a weekly gathering. Now, number 3, the third thing we are hoping for, and here's the big, exciting one. Are you ready? No? Let's pretend like you are. I am. I'm like super excited. We are going to take the way, what you are looking at right now, this move of God to God's glory by his mercy, which makes no sense in my mind, but is a move of God. We're going to take the way, we're going to pick it up, we're going to move it from Friday nights to Saturday nights, from right here in Building T out in the suburbs, downtown, the West End, the heart of the city, from being a college ministry with age parameters, 18 to 28, no young people or old people, to anybody and everybody, but I think by its nature it's going to be for the most part us, Saturday nights, downtown. And we're going to take the way and we are going to plant a church downtown in the heart of the city. But let me clarify. It's not going to be a separate entity from Solid Rock. We are going to become one church in 2 locations. Everybody say one church in 2 locations out loud. Here we go, 1, 2, 3. One church in 2 locations, which means we are going to become one church, one leadership team, same pastors, same elders, same theology, same DNA, same culture, same teaching over the weekend, but in two locations, downtown and out here on the west side. Which means if you are a part of Solid Rock or you're with us or whatever, you're gonna pick one of the two, either Solid Rock downtown, and you're gonna make your way downtown on Saturday nights and seek Jesus right down in the heart of the city. We are renting out, by the grace of God, First Baptist Church, which is incredible. 1,000 seats, huge balcony right in the West End, right by Ace Hotel, Stumptown, Powell's Books, American Apparel, like right there, right where thousands of people go on Saturday nights to hang out. I think we have some pictures, maybe? Yes, there we are. Gorgeous. I think we have one or two pictures. 1,000 seats, massive balcony, stained glass. Please don't break when we go down there, guys. The building is amazing. Let's look at one of the outside. It's like Robin Hood's castle. It's amazing. And it's right down in the West End. There's parking all around. It's safe. It's not dangerous. And the plan is to go down there as a huge mass of people right into the heart of the city on Saturday nights and reach out to people who do not know Jesus. You pick either Saturday nights, downtown, West End, or you stay out here. Nothing is changing out here. Solid Rock, business as usual. It's going to be the same teaching I'm going to teach, or whoever is teaching downtown on Saturday nights, and then drive out here and teach here on Sundays. Same worship, same theology, same theme, different context, one urban and one suburban, but same people, one church and two locations. But the heart, why are we doing this? The entire point is to reach people who right now don't know Jesus. And to go right to where culture is made and right to where people are. I mean, you go down there tomorrow night on a Saturday night, there are, I'm not joking, thousands of young people. In the summer, there are people spilling out of the restaurants and bars and clubs and theaters and coffee shops and hotels. I mean, not only the sidewalks, into the street. And what could happen if huge numbers of us would pour out of some old building, most of the time empty, and walk a block away or 2 blocks away or 5 blocks away, eat dinner and talk to people about Jesus. We're not going to feed you guys dinner anymore after. We're going to say, listen, you get out of here, and you go eat dinner somewhere, go walk somewhere in groups of 3, 4, 5 people and invite people to church and talk to people about Jesus. And if you live down here, do life and invite your friends and people you work with. And the entire point is for us to live as missionaries. Not as spectators who go to church and watch, but as missionaries to the city of Portland who are reaching out to the world around us. But here's what you should know. We are going to a very difficult place to plant a church. Like I said, more dogs than Christians. What you may or may not know is in the city of Portland proper, not like the region, but like Portland proper, the stats are, from what I understand, 9 out of 10 church plants fail within 2 years. Portland, true story, is known all around the nation. I was talking with some church planters the other day from Texas as the church planters' graveyard. Like where church planters go to die. There was an assessor for a church planting organization who was here about 3 or 4 weeks ago on vacation, and he lives in Manhattan. In Manhattan, 95% of the population does not go to church, worse than here. And he was here with his wife on vacation, and he was staying downtown, right about 2 or 3 blocks away from the church, I think. And he said, in his opinion, this is a guy who goes all over the world helping people plant churches. He said, in his opinion, Portland is the most secular, godless city he's ever seen in his entire life. The dude lives in Manhattan. Dang! And we are going to the church planter's graveyard. But I think we might completely fail, or I think God might move in huge ways. I was with one of my friends who's a pastor of another one of the churches out here on the west side. Great man of God, great dude, becoming friends. And before he was pastoring his church out here, he tried to plant a church in downtown Portland for I think 2 years. And before that, he worked at one of the super old churches downtown. And he worked downtown for 2 years. He started with about 30 people. And he said, if I remember right, in 2 years, 3 people showed up outside of his 30. 2 years. 3 people. And he loves the city, lived right down there, loves the city. And he said after years of being down there, he concluded the only hope a church has of ever making it in Portland, in the urban core of the city of Portland, is if a large body of people were to go down together. And true story, about 6 or 7 years ago, I didn't know, he was going around to the suburban churches out here on the west side asking the pastors if anybody would please plant a church downtown with 200 or 300 people or plant a campus or some kind of expression of church downtown, because he was thinking if we could just get some people who love Jesus together to go together, we could do something. And I feel like what God's been doing here among us for the last 5 years, I feel now like the entire time God was moving us here. It's kind of like when you go to a movie, you know, and there's like a surprise ending, there's like a twist at the end, like you find out Luke's father is Darth Vader. Are you serious? Right? Or whatever, you fill in the blank. What the first things, I know we all saw that movie back when we were like 2, or some of you were like not born yet, but whatever. The first thing that happens is you start to replay the film in your mind, right? And you start to reimagine the entire story through the lens of the new twist ending, and now everything makes sense. Now in retrospect, you're like, oh, now everything makes sense. And now looking back at the last 5 years and what God's done among us, I may be wrong, but now I think everything makes sense. Now I think what God was doing was preparing us for this. I think of the analogy of an incubator or a greenhouse, or think of a womb. When a baby is conceived in the womb, it's not strong enough to survive out in the open. It takes time, it takes months of growth and maturity and nutrients and vitamins and patience for it to get big enough and strong enough to where it can survive. And I wonder if what God's been doing with us now for years, unbeknownst to me, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I wonder if what God's been doing all along was helping us, shaping us, molding us, making us, preparing us to jump out and step out in faith. Now, timeline. We are planning, God willing, on starting the church in January with the new year. For the fall, we're going to walk through the book of Nehemiah, and we're going to take the entire fall to pray and plan and prepare and get ready in our church and in our hearts to step out in faith and live as missionaries to the heart of the city Saturday nights. We are hoping to start the new college ministry also in January or at the latest by March, and hoping for the First Way conference sometime. We are thinking in 2010. We are hoping for sometime in the spring. Now let me clarify 3 things. 1, the way is not ending. We are moving, we are changing, we are adapting to our broken city and the leading we believe of God's Spirit after years, I promise you, after years of not myself, but tons of us praying and fasting and seeking God together with an open fist saying, Jesus, this is your ministry, this is your deal, you are the lead pastor of the way. What is your heart? What is your plan? What is your will? We believe from the bottom of our hearts, this is it. The way is not ending. The way is not a time slot or a formula. It's us, and we are not ending. I hope we are taking the city of Portland by storm with the gospel of Jesus. 2, we are doing this not for ourselves. We are not doing this for ourselves. We are doing this for people who don't know Jesus, which means if you are asking right now, okay, how does this help me? How does this make my life better? How does this make my life more comfortable? The answer is it doesn't. To be honest, it makes your life more difficult. We're not going to let you show up anymore and watch. We love you guys, and now we're going to ask you to participate. Now we're going to ask you to invite people and throw your heart in and show up and help put on church and reach out and move downtown. We're going to ask you to do tons of stuff, and you can or you can't, your call, your prerogative. We're not going to let you sit and watch anymore because we love you. But this is not for ourselves. We are going to create space right in one of the most dark and empty places in our whole city for people to know Jesus. For people who right now are who knows where, doing who knows what, lost and far from the living God, to encounter him maybe for the first time, maybe back again after years of wandering. We're going to create space and open up our doors and invite people to know Jesus. And last but not least, number 3, we are asking you, going on record, we are asking you to pray about joining us. Because if this is me and the pastors and 10 or 20 of you crazies, we are doomed to failure. And we are going to be like a plane shot down on the runway. I believe this will only work if, one, the Spirit of Jesus does something miraculous, and two, a whole bunch of you guys join with us together. And we go not as individuals, but we go as a body, we go as family, we go as brothers and sisters together. I think of Nehemiah back in our story. I'm going to end. He was living in a palace. Talk about comfort, talk about security, safety, high-paying job, enjoy. His life was great. Nothing wrong with his life. But he was willing to put his neck on the line and to leave everything, leave his comfort, leave his past, and go work for the good of his city. And I believe that God is calling us to leave our own comfort, our own safety, our own security, maybe even our own enjoyment, our own preferences. Nothing wrong with preferences. And pursue him and trust him and walk with him and break for the people of our city. As most of you know, I'm a dad. My oldest son, Jude, 3 years old, going on 4. I think of when I'm in the water and he's on the side of the pool or the side of the boat, the edge of the boat, and my arms are out. Hey, Jude, jump, let's play, let's have fun. Jump into my arms. And he's scared to death of the water. I mean, he's 3. He's tough, but he's 3, okay? He's scared to death of the water, and every time Jude jumps, he deliberates. Should I not? And he's miserable, and Jude, let's go, let's play, jump. And he always jumps, always. He's a sucker. He's awesome. I love my boy. He always jumps because his faith in his father is greater than his fear of drowning. And I believe that in spite of the risk, in spite of changing something like this, which is going awesome, why would we mess with this? You guys are amazing. I believe God is calling us to jump and to leave fear for faith and leave cowardice for courage and leave comfort for compassion for people who don't know Jesus. I just made that up. That all was kind of alliterating and awesome. Are you guys with me? Hey, let's stand up.